Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. We know how busy you are and really appreciate your time. And we're also very grateful for the work you do as educators supporting your students, and we are here to support you. Today, we'll be talking about the foundational skills that every student needs to master in order to become a proficient reader. We know we all plan our instruction by following our state standards, right? The standards tell us what students should be able to do by the end of their grade, but they don't tell us specifically how we should teach those skills. I remember my first year teaching. I had a lot of information about standards, but I was left wondering how to teach those standards to my students. Today, I'll be sharing practical and effective ways to teach foundational reading skills to your beginning and struggling readers. As you know, this is a two-part series, and here's the big picture of both sessions. There are 4 foundational reading skills that will be splitting between the 2 sessions: print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency. And here's our agenda for today. Hopefully you have access to the handout, which includes the webinar slides and some helpful takeaways. These are tools that you might find helpful when you're planning and prioritizing your instruction using your current curriculum. The takeaways are blank and reproducible, so you can use them right away with your students. If you're anything like me, you love getting free stuff that you can use right away in your classroom. And I'll let you know the page numbers for those takeaways as we go along. So we're going to start today with a broad look at the standards and research behind the foundational reading skills. I'll be referencing specific standards and research studies for each foundational reading skill throughout the presentation. So let's get started. In the introduction to the Common Core State Standards, we're reminded that the focus of the standards is on our results rather than how we get to that end. The standards tell us what to teach, but not how. So teachers need to use their professional judgment and experience to identify the tools and knowledge that will be most helpful for meeting the goals. In this webinar, I'm going to briefly review some key research findings about reading development, as well as revisiting some predictors of reading success. If we keep in mind which content is critical and which strategies are most effective, we can use that knowledge to plan and prioritize our instruction and get better results. You're probably already familiar with the term science of reading. It's out there in the media and social media today. Well, science of reading is what we use to label the comprehensive body of reading research that's been gathered over decades of study. It's a collective knowledge, and it reflects the contributions of many different disciplines, including psychology, education, and neuroscience. And there are 2 big questions that this information seeks to answer. First of all, what knowledge and cognitive processes are necessary for an individual to read proficiently? And second of all, what are the best ways to teach these essential building blocks to our beginning readers and to prevent and mitigate reading difficulties in our students? The research that's compiled in the science of reading gives us information on what skills are involved in the process of reading, how they work together, and which parts of the brain are responsible for reading development. The information on this slide comes from the Institute of Multisensory Education, and it gives us a good summary of the science of reading. As I said, it's a comprehensive body of research. It gives us a deeper understanding of how we learn to read. And it also tells us about brain research, telling us which parts of the brain are responsible for reading development. And that all leads us to identifying evidence-based practices for teaching foundational literacy skills. So what does all this mean for instruction? Why is the science important? Many parents and early childhood teachers just assume that if a student is exposed to books early in life, they'll automatically learn to read. But research shows that 20% of elementary school students struggle to learn to read, and an additional 20% are considered at risk. Furthermore, only 33% of fourth graders performed at or above the proficient level on the most recent National Reading Assessment in 2022. However, there's good news. 95% of students can benefit and taught to read proficiently using highly effective instruction. So advocates of the science of reading give us a call to action. We need to make a commitment to evidence-based reading instruction and end the use of practices that have been shown to be ineffective. And that brings us to structured literacy. You probably have heard this term as well. I'm just going to do a brief review of it for us. Structured literacy has to do with implementing methods that are appropriate for all students, and they're particularly necessary for students who have learning differences. Structured literacy is explicit. Teachers provide a direct, clear explanation for each new concept, in addition to teacher modeling, student practice, and teacher feedback. It's also sequential and systematic. The instruction follows a well-designed scope and sequence with a logical progression from simple skills to more complex skills. Structured literacy is prescriptive and diagnostic. This means that teachers begin by identifying their students' strengths and challenges to plan for remediation, along with continuous formal assessment to inform progress monitoring and develop their actions for differentiation and intervention. And finally, it's cumulative. This means that new concepts are layered on previously learned concepts, and frequent review will build automaticity in our students. So let's take a closer look at the foundational reading skills. Why are they so important? It's right there in the name, isn't it? These are the foundation, the building blocks for literacy development. The foundational reading skills for kindergarten through fifth grade include specific goals for print concepts. This is understanding the organization and basic features of print. Phonological awareness, which has to do with spoken words, syllables, and sounds. Phonics and word recognition, which is decoding and reading words. And finally, fluency, which is reading with a high level of accuracy at an appropriate rate with expression to support comprehension. As I said, today we're focusing on print concepts and phonological awareness, and next time we'll talk more about phonics and word recognition and fluency. Remember, the foundational reading skills are not an end in and of themselves, but they are necessary and important components of a comprehensive reading program. If we want to develop readers who can comprehend texts across a range of types and disciplines, they have to have a solid foundation in these basic skills. We know that some students develop those foundational skills very quickly. They can read the materials assigned to them. They enjoy reading, and they find it rewarding. They're able to decode and recognize words automatically, so they can focus their mental energy on developing comprehension of what they read. Right from the beginning, these students are exposed to much more text because they read more. On the other hand, students who develop foundational skills more slowly are going to struggle. And maybe that's why you signed up for this webinar. You probably have students in your class or in your building who are struggling with reading right now. Students who struggle to read are often assigned materials that are too hard for them, so they become frustrated. They find reading unrewarding, and they might even try to avoid reading-related activities. They're going to struggle to decode or recognize words automatically, so they're also going to struggle with comprehension. Think about what we avoid. If we don't enjoy them, we're not going to do them. As a result, the students are exposed to much less text because they read less, and this has long-term consequences for them. It can lead to a downward spiral of reading failure, and that can be frustrating for students and their teachers. You may have heard this term before, the downward spiral. Students who have difficulty learning to read words accurately and fluently are going to struggle with reading more sophisticated text. They have less exposure to text, so they don't develop the language, vocabulary, and background knowledge they need to become proficient readers. This begins the downward spiral, and these students might have a hard time ever catching up. Keith Stanovich called this phenomenon the Matthew effect. Students who read early are going to continue to improve as they read more and more text, so they become richer in language, vocabulary, and background knowledge. Whereas students who don't learn to read early could continue to struggle. They might read less as they're faced with more difficult text. So they could become poorer with each passing year. And we've all seen struggling students lose their motivation and interest in reading. Teachers want to know how to motivate these students because we don't want our students to fall into this downward spiral. Research tells us that there are strategies to help our struggling readers catch up to their peers, and today we'll be talking about some of those strategies. So let's look at some effective practices for teaching foundational skills, starting with print concepts. Usually we think of print concepts as applying to very young students, but instruction in phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency also begins with early learners. And that instruction continues until students become proficient. Mastery of these skills is the foundation for building vocabulary and comprehending text. So today we're going to start with print concepts, understanding the organization and basic features of print. And there are two parts to print concepts. We have print or book awareness and letter knowledge. This is where a child is first introduced to literacy. Print is everywhere in our world, and some children have a lot of exposure to books growing up. Their families and caregivers show them how to handle a book, where on a page to begin reading, and that printed symbols communicate meaning. In school, teachers use print referencing when they're reading books aloud to their students, and this is one way to teach print concepts. The other part of print concepts is letter knowledge, where your students become familiar with the 26 uppercase and lowercase letter shapes, and they learn to associate the shape of the letter with its name. We're not talking here about sound symbol correspondence. That comes later when we talk about phonics. The state standards tell us that kindergarten and first grade students need to demonstrate understanding of the organization and basic features of print. And research tells us that a child's understanding of print concepts can predict their future reading success. And that makes sense. As teachers, we know that students who enter school with more print and book awareness have an advantage over their peers. They have additional vocabulary and background knowledge because they've been exposed early to print and books. It's always nice to see research confirm what we've experienced while working with our students. The intersection of research and practice makes a strong case for teaching foundational skills early with our beginning readers. Here's the first takeaway for you guys. This is a printable tool that you can use right away, and it's our gift to you. The page is on this full-size handout is on page 17. And if you want to print that out later, you certainly can. Students should be able to demonstrate an understanding of most of these print and book awareness concepts by the end of kindergarten. And the takeaway version is a checklist of these skills. Remember, children don't automatically understand how print works. So what's the best way to teach these print concepts? Well, the first way is print referencing. This is done during read-alouds in the classroom, and it's a great, effective strategy for teaching about print concepts. This is when an adult shares a storybook with their group and directs the children's attention to things like the front cover, the back cover, where to start reading on a page, how we read from left to right, and recognizing that there's a space between words. You can use the takeaway checklist during your read alouds to track your use of these print and book awareness skills. It is suggested that you just use 3 to 5 print references during the reading of a book. We still want our students to enjoy reading, so we don't want to overdo the print referencing. So if you're working with very young students, choose a few of these skills from the checklist to emphasize each time you share a book with your students. And repetition is also really helpful in helping them to understand these concepts. And have some fun while you're at it. Students can come up and point to the different parts of the book during your circle time. The other part of print concepts is letter knowledge. The standards tell us that in order to develop letter knowledge, kindergarten and first grade students need to recognize and name all the upper and lowercase letters of the alphabet. Our preschoolers can sing the alphabet song, right? But have you noticed what they do in the middle of the song? Someone designed this t-shirt that shows what most students sing between L and P. They might have memorized the song, but they can't match each letter name to its corresponding visual letter. And that's especially obvious when they get to LMNOP. Research tells us that a student's ability to identify the letters of the alphabet by name is one of the best predictors of how readily that child will learn to read. It's almost as accurate as an entire reading assessment in making that prediction. We also know that when students can name the letters accurately, automatically, and in random order, it shows how thoroughly they've learned the letter names. And that's a springboard for learning and remembering letter-sound relationships. We'll talk more about that in part 2. Keep some things in mind as you teach letter naming. Most early reading programs teach the uppercase letters first because they're more visually distinguishable than the lowercase letters. And since uppercase letters are typically learned first, lowercase letters that look like the capital letters are easier to learn, like S and Z. We also know that letters with similar shapes are going to confuse students, so we need to be careful, especially with letters like B, D, P, Q, and G. Studies have found that students had less confusion if they mastered one potentially confusing letter before being introduced to another letter with a similar shape. Here's a table of visually similar letters, and you can find it at the bottom of your takeaway on page 17 in your handout. Think about how your current program sequences letter knowledge instruction. Does it teach the capital letters first? Are the letter pairs that are almost identical in upper and lower case taught quickly? That leaves more instructional time for those that don't match. Are you making sure that your students master one potentially confusing letter before they're introduced to another letter with a similar shape? That's especially important for our students who struggle. Use the takeaway while you're planning the sequence of your instruction. All right, we're going to move on to the next foundational skill, phonological awareness. This is understanding spoken words, syllables, and sounds. Phonological awareness is an umbrella term for the understanding of the different units of oral language, including word awareness, syllable awareness, onset rhyme awareness, and phoneme awareness. Phonemic awareness focuses on the individual sounds in spoken words, and it doesn't develop naturally without modeling. So, educators need to teach phonemic awareness skills directly during early reading instruction. When your students begin to transition from phonological awareness to phonics, they'll learn the relationship between an individual sound or phoneme and the letter or letters that represent that sound. That's called the grapheme. So when we're talking about phonics, we're talking about the actual letters that correspond to the sounds. So if you're showing your students letters or words, you're working on phonics, and we'll talk about that next time. Phonological awareness is mainly a verbal and auditory experience. So we're going to look at that more closely. When it comes to phonological awareness, the standards tell us that kindergarten and first grade students need to demonstrate an understanding of spoken words, syllables, and sounds. What does the research tell us? We know that phonemic awareness ability is a strong predictor of future reading ability. In fact, it can predict literacy performance more accurately than other variables like intelligence, vocabulary knowledge, or socioeconomic status. Students with strong phonological awareness skills are likely to become good readers, but students with weak phonological skills will likely struggle with reading. It's estimated that more than 90% of students who have significant reading problems struggle in their ability to process phonological information. The good news is that phonological awareness is one of the few factors that teachers can influence significantly through instruction, unlike intelligence, vocabulary, and socioeconomic status. I love this table because it puts this all into a really good perspective for us. Here, the phonological awareness skills are organized into 4 different categories: word, syllable, onset rhyme, and phoneme awareness. On page 18 in your handout, you'll find an expanded version of this table that shows the specific skills within each of these categories, along with an example for each skill. Phonological awareness instruction should be systematic. Remember when we were talking about structured literacy? The arrow across the top shows that the categories become more complex as students progress from the word level to syllables, to onset and rhyme, and then to phonemes. The arrow on the left-hand side also shows that students progress down each category as they learn increasingly complex skills. Let's look at the phoneme awareness column. You can see here that first, students are going to learn to isolate, identify, and categorize phonemes. Then they're taught to blend phonemes to make a word and segment a word into phonemes. The most challenging phonological awareness skills include deleting, adding, and substituting phonemes. All of the activities in the table build phonological awareness skills, but blending and segmenting are especially critical. From the research, we know that segmenting words into phonemes and blending them into words contributes more to learning to read and spell than any of the other activities under this phonological awareness umbrella. And that's from the National Reading Panel. Let's look at an example. Since blending phonemes into words is a critical skill, here's an example of a blending lesson at the phoneme level from a teacher-directed phonological awareness program. When you provide a visual representation for phonemes like these circles, it makes the sounds less abstract and more concrete for your students. Here we're using an interactive software to display icons, and each icon represents a sound. You could also use plastic discs or math manipulatives with your students. The demonstration lesson uses an interactive iBook on an iPad or a Mac. So I'll be the teacher in this lesson, and I invite you to play the role of a student. You'll hear me say both the teacher parts and the student parts to show how the lesson goes. Ready? Here are 3 sounds that make up a word. I'm going to blend the sounds slowly. Then you will say the word fast. For example, I'll say is, and you'll say it fast. Miss. Listen. Say it fast. Mom. Great job. Let's try another one. Say it fast. Sun. Great job. Let's do one more. Ready? Ish. Say it fast. Fish. Awesome. Here's an example of a segmenting lesson at the phoneme level. In earlier lessons, students have learned to isolate the beginning and ending sounds in words. This lesson introduces medial phoneme isolation, which is isolating the sound in the middle of the word. I'll be the teacher again with you as my students. Here we go. This lesson reviews the rhyme 1, 2, buckle my shoe. 1, 2, buckle my shoe. 3, 4, shut the door. Listen, shut. Everyone, say that word with me. Ready? Shut. There are 3 sounds in shut. Everyone, say each sound in shut while I touch the icons. Ready? Shut. Blend the sound slowly. Ready? Shut. Say it fast. Ready? Shut. Think about the first sound you hear in shut. Everyone, say the first sound. Ready? Shh. Now, think about the last sound you hear in shut. Now, think about the middle sound you hear in shut. Everyone, say the middle sound. Ready? Yes, the middle sound in shut is . The examples we just looked at come from Read Naturally's Funēmics program. Think for a minute about your students and your current curriculum. Do you assess students and continue to provide instruction to beginning and struggling readers until they master these phonological awareness skills? And remember, you may have students, even older students, who have significant reading problems who may not have mastered these skills. Whether you use Funēmics or another material available, keep in mind that you need to systematically move your students as quickly as possible through the phonological awareness skills toward the goal of blending and segmenting at the phoneme level. Think for a minute about some follow-up activities you could do with your students to build these skills. In my classroom, I would assign each student a sound, and then I would put them into groups of 3 so they could arrange and rearrange themselves to make real and nonsense words. You can have fun with this, and your students will too. If you Google phonological awareness games, you'll get a lot of great ideas. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our Foundational Reading Skills webinar. I really appreciate you joining me today. And if you're interested in reading more about foundational reading skills, Christy's going to put a link to a white paper for you to look at. And do try to join us next time for part 2. In the meantime, if you're interested in trying out Read Naturally's programs for free, you can sign up on our website for our free 60-day trial. Here's my contact information if you need to reach me or have any questions. You can also reach out to our customer service email there. And just a reminder, you will receive a recording of the webinar in the next 24 hours, as well as a survey with a few questions that we'd love for you to answer for us. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.